Imagine a quiet evening in a southern state, sometime in the early 20th century. The heat envelops the earth. Cicadas chirp their endless song. The scent of blooming magnolia mixes with the smell of sweat and plowed fields. In a small, dilapidated house, a kerosene lamp burns, casting bizarre shadows on the walls. My great-grandmother, Sarah, lived in this house. She was only 18 years old, and she carried my grandfather under her heart. Her eyes, usually full of laughter, have lately reflected only weariness and anxiety, because in the world she lived in, being a black woman meant carrying an immense burden. Sarah grew up on a cotton plantation. Her parents were descendants of slaves. Slavery was formally abolished, but in reality, little had changed. White landowners still treated black families as their property. Their labor was paid next to nothing. Their rights were ignored, and their dignity was constantly trampled upon. Sarah remembered her grandmother's stories of the overseer's cruelty, of families torn apart, of hunger and humiliation. These stories were passed down from generation to generation as a warning and as a reminder of the price of freedom. Sarah dreamed of a better life for her child. She wanted him to get an education so he wouldn't be forced to work in the fields from dawn till dusk. She dreamed of a world where skin color wouldn't determine his fate. But the reality was cruel. She knew that her child would be born into a world where he would be judged not by his character, but by the color of his skin. She was afraid for him, for his future, for his life. One evening, as Sarah was returning home from the fields, she witnessed a terrible scene. White men, drunk and aggressive, were beating a young black man. He was just passing by, but that was enough to provoke their anger. Sarah froze in horror, not knowing what to do. She understood that if she intervened, she risked her life and the life of her child. But she couldn't just stand and watch. Her heart was breaking with pain and helplessness. Sarah tried to intervene. She screamed, begging them to stop. One of the men turned to her and looked at her with contempt. He pushed her to the ground and spat in her face. The other men laughed. Sarah lay on the ground, humiliated and frightened. She felt utterly helpless. At that moment, she realized that she had no rights in this world, that her life meant nothing to these people. After that incident, Sarah became even more withdrawn and cautious. She was afraid to leave the house, afraid to attract attention. She knew that at any moment she could become a victim of violence. Her only hope was her child. She believed that he could change this world, that he could build a future where there would be no room for racism and injustice. When it came time to give birth, Sarah gave birth alone in her small house. The pain was unbearable, but she endured, thinking about her child. After many hours of agony, my grandfather, James, was born. When Sarah picked him up for the first time, she felt great love and hope. She swore that she would do everything possible to protect him from the cruelty of this world. James grew up in an atmosphere of fear and injustice. He knew from childhood that he was different from white children. He saw how his mother was humiliated and insulted, and how his father was denied a job because of his skin color. He understood that in this world he had to fight for every right, for every dignity. James was an intelligent and capable boy. He dreamed of education, but in those days, Black children did not have access to good schools. He learned to read and write from his mother, who in turn learned from her grandmother. He read all the books he could get his hands on and greedily absorbed the knowledge. He understood that education was his only chance to escape from poverty and injustice. One day, James witnessed a lynching. White men grabbed a black man accused of a crime he did not commit and hung him from a tree. James was terrified. He could see the fear and despair in the man's eyes. He understood that any black man could be in his place, including himself. This incident changed his life forever. He realized that he could no longer remain silent, that he had to fight for his rights. James began participating in protests against racial segregation. He joined the civil rights movement. He risked his life, but he believed that it was necessary in order to change this world. He participated in sit-ins, protest marches, and voter registration campaigns. He was arrested several times, but he never gave up. James met my grandmother, Emily, at one of the protests. She was as brave and single-minded as he was. They fell in love with each other and fought for their rights together. They got married and dreamed of a future where their children would not face racism and discrimination. Despite all the difficulties, James and Emily have achieved some success. They were able to get an education. They were able to buy their house. They were able to give their children a better future. But they understood that the struggle was not over yet, that racism still existed in society, that it was taking on new forms, that it was permeating all spheres of life. I was born into a family where they always talked about racism and injustice. Since childhood, I knew that I was different from white children, that I needed to fight for my place in the sun. I remember my grandmother telling me stories about lynchings and segregation. These stories made me angry and sad. I understood that I was a part of history, that I was responsible for the future. I grew up in an era when racism wasn't as obvious as it used to be. But it still existed. It just became more hidden, more subtle. I have faced discrimination at school, at work, and in everyday life. People judge me by the color of my skin, not by my abilities and qualities. I decided to become an activist just like my grandparents. I participate in protest actions, I write articles, I make speeches. I use my voice to speak about issues of racism and injustice. I want my children to live in a world where there will be no place for prejudice and hatred. I know that the fight will be long and difficult, but I won't give up. I will continue to fight for my rights, for the rights of my children, for the rights of all those who face racism and discrimination. I believe that together we can build a better future. Sometimes I feel tired, depressed, disappointed. I see how much more needs to be done, how many people still deny the existence of racism. But then I remember my great-grandmother Sarah, my grandfather James, my grandmother Emily. I remember their resilience, their courage, their hope, and it gives me the strength to keep fighting. My family's story is a story of pain, but it's also a story of hope. This is a story about how people, despite all the difficulties, continue to fight for their rights, for their dignity, and for their future. This is a story that must be told so that we don't forget the lessons of the past, and so that we can build a better future for everyone. Please remember this story. Remember Sarah, James, and Emily. Remember that the struggle for equality and justice is our common task. And never give up.